is John Tabacco, and this is Clam Radio. And today I'll be talking to Bob Ball, computer scientist and polymath, and a man with many ideas. And I don't know, I guess you could kind of call him, what can we call you, Bob?
Worried.
Worried. He's very worried about the environment. And today, plastic people, we're going to be talking about plastic and kind of the problems.
The title of the show, A Plastic Earth.
The plastic Earth, which is totally true. But plastic isn't, if human beings came up with plastic, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Well, would that be considered natural, though? Like,
No.
naturally, we would come up with stuff?
No.
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 That's not nature. Plastic isn't nature.
Well, consider the fact that, well, we're supposedly, see, this is where I divide from the Darwinists, because they say on one end, there's natural products, then there's inorganic products. Well, if we're a creation of so-called natural or nature, then everything that we create is natural in nature, and I don't subscribe to that.
Right. Someone would argue that human beings are supposed to screw up the planet. That's what they're supposed to do, I guess. That would be natural, right? But it can be avoided. That's the thing that's so sad about this.
Well, unfortunately, just like anything, when I did some research on this, I was alerted to it by a video I saw, and then I started doing some research, and I was absolutely horrified. I always, unfortunately, look into things, and I think that one thing, well, this beats all of them as far as a crisis. It's incredible. Some of these plastics don't decay, which means some radioactive isotopes decay faster than these plastics do.
Wow.
And worse, these plastics break down with ultraviolet light. They go into nanoparticles, plastic particles.
Well, one thing I want to say before we start off is I feel a little contradictory here, because as much as I understand the importance of what we're trying to talk about, I am a person that uses plastics. I've used plastic bags. I drink out of plastic bottles. So I feel like, I would like to change that around, but I feel I'm surrounded by that plastic. I don't know how I can get away from not using plastic. How do we do it?
2 million plastic bags a minute.
A minute?
A minute.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Another staggering thing, 200 million plastic bottles a day.
It's incredible.
Are thrown away. And
where does it go?
Well,
it's supposed to be recycled, right? But that's no point. There's no point in doing that.
It's supposed to be recycled, but unfortunately, we're not the only people on this planet. Most of the pollution is coming from the Asian continents and India and whatnot, and their trash is, well, there's not a single beach in the world, Antarctica to Malaysia to Bali to anywhere, that's not polluted every single day, twice a day, from the tides coming in with plastic.
There's plastic near the Antarctic?
There's plastic on the, there's actually more garbage on the Antarctic shelf than any other beach known in the continent, because nobody cleans it up.
That would make sense, sure.
And from fishing nets to all kinds of stuff, all these things are being consumed by sea life, sea creatures, and over 70 species have been...
How can they consume it? And they can't eat the plastic. It just sort of comes into their...
Well, what happens is it goes
bodies?
in, they see it. Birds, like, for example, they see it as a shiny object or whatever, they eat it, and it gets caught up in their digestive system. Turtles look at plastic bags floating in the water as jellyfish, so they eat it, and it gets tied up into their digestive system and kills them. Here's some very, very disturbing numbers, and then I'll tell you where all these gyres are. So, since 1950, we have made some 320 trillion tons of plastic. Trillion tons. Believe it or not, each year we make enough bubble wrap alone to circle the equator 10 times.
Wow. That's just bubble wrap, folks.
That's just... 60 to 80% of our textiles worn or in carpets, items we use every day, from the car to the plastic chair, contains plastic. Polyester is a plastic. Polypropylene, it just goes on and on. And there are specific chemicals that make up these plastics called resins. The one thing you have to realize is that they absorb toxins from the environment, and they also partake molecules into the water that mimic estrogen. The estrogen counts in human beings is getting quite alarming. Actually, the studies that they've done on children from 10 years old and less are 6 to 8 times higher estrogen levels than in normal adults. And what it's causing is these children to enter, specifically the females, to enter puberty at earlier ages. And it's causing problems with the masculine development of men. And it's causing 1/3 of the men to become low sperm counts, let's put it that way, but headed towards sterility.
But isn't that also affected by the GMOs and all the stuff we eat as well? I mean,
it's all cumulative. Everything.
Plastic you can see, though.
Everything.
You can see
everything.
that.
Well, like I said, when I started the research on this, okay, you want to know another statistics that's really, really horrible? 98% of the tap water in the United States, in the USA, contains microparticles of plastic. Now you're going to say, Bob, how's that possible? Go ahead.
How is that possible that we have such plastic in our tap water?
Because we have at least 40 to 60% synthetic fibers in our clothes. And we've been washing those clothes for years in our washing machines. And that water drains into the aquifer further. When we dry those clothes, the open air dryers take those fibers and they shed nanoparticles of plastic into the air. The air then goes over the lakes and rivers and whatnot and into our reservoirs, and it ends up, and we've been doing this since 1950, folks. So now we have the highest concentration of plastic contamination in our tap water. Bottled water and plastic bottles, 99.8% of them recently were tested and have shown to have microparticles of plastic in them. Now, the big problem is that none of these plastics that are used for consumer goods, such as that contains our milk, that's a polyethylene, that contains our food or wrapped like fish and whatnot, none of these items, which all partake different chemicals into the items of food, have to go through the FDA. A lobbyist in Washington made sure that, because they had studies, just like this is reminding of the tobacco companies.
Right.
If you remember, the tobacco companies knew that cigarettes caused cancer all the way back in 1930. They, again, were funding different campaigns of different congressmen and whatnot so that their industry would be protected. It's unbelievable. There was a scientist in 1950, believe it or not, came up with a resin which would biodegrade in 5 years. Mm-hmm. And it was fully edible. It's plastic. And
fully edible, like what do you mean, for bacteria to eat, or
anybody?
Oh, you mean like those little styrofoam peanut kind of things? Cornstarch or something?
Well, there's this resin could be used in all kinds of forms of plastic. Mm-hmm. It wasn't oil-based. It was cellulose-based. And which means it was from a plant, you know. Well, I'll explain to you the big problem. Okay, so 400 gallons of resin only costs $9. Yet it makes only 1 million bottles of plastic. So $9 makes 9 million bottles of plastic. Mm. And it's cheaper for these guys to get these chemicals in and produce these bottles of plastic than to take the existing bottles and recycle them because of the energy cost, right? Because energy is so wonderfully expensive, right? If it was cheaper, we could be recycling everything. Only less than 5% get recycled. So that's a big problem.
Well, haven't we done some stuff? McDonald's and those companies have stopped making the polystyrene cups and stuff. I mean, we've tried to like cut down on those kind of plastics. So we've tried to make some sort of difference. Is that not making a difference? We're not doing enough.
We're one country.
Yeah, it's a big country though.
This
consumer.
We do consume. There's a lot of packaging and stuff.
It's not like China though. That's a very big country that's polluting a lot. Unfortunately,
China is responsible for 50% of the plastics that get dumped into the ocean.
That's a lot, man.
50%, and worldwide, it's caused. They call them gyres after some guy. But basically, from the flows of the ocean, there's a continent of plastic in the North Pacific and a continent of plastic in the South Pacific. And
a continent, so that's got to be pretty freaking huge, man. You're looking about thousands of miles across, whatever.
It's bigger than Alaska.
Wow.
In the Sargasso Sea, which used to be, which is, in the Atlantic. And the sailors used to comment on it about, seaweed patches and stuff because of the currents. It's now our plastic dump in the Atlantic.
You figure the Bermuda Triangle would take care of that stuff, but I guess not.
No.
That stuff is just
unfortunately...
How's it getting there, though? I thought we have, like, these landfills and stuff. How does it drift out that far? Fall from planes? What is it? How does it do that?
Well, people leave garbage everywhere, and...
on the beaches and stuff, obviously. That's what you're talking about.
Well, the beaches, landfill storms, whatever, people throwing their cups and whatever overboard, and
I guess
it's
not
put away. And if you look at your trash, it's just 50% of the world plastic is actually thrown away within the first year that the consumer gets it.
Yeah, well, I could see that. I would drink a bottle and that's it. It's done. You throw it out.
Well, you're drinking plastic. If you've ever said to yourself, this water tastes funny if it's left a plastic bottle in the sun, or it's when you're saying it doesn't taste very good, it tastes plastic. Yeah, it partakes. It's plastic, and they knew this. This is the thing that really irritates me. It's like they knew this.
But they had a problem with. I like glass. I think glass tastes good, but I think it's just too heavy for them to transport. Isn't that why they use plastic bottles?
Energy. It all comes down to energy. But the thing about glass is it's 100% recyclable. It's basically just another form of rock.
Right.
And it's harmless. If you did drop it in the ocean, it just goes to the bottom of the ocean, and it's just another rock. It's, but it's energy, right?
Yes, that's true.
Tremendous amount of weight, tremendous amount of cost in recycling it, and it's actually better in a lot of respects. It doesn't. You could store it for a long period of time, and it all comes down to energy. It all becomes down to this whole oil economy that we've dependent on. The reason why our economy is so heavily oil-based and not other energies is it's all about taxes.
Yeah.
People don't understand that 80% of the world governments get most of their revenue from energy, taxes on energy. It's another way to tax the consumer for, their goods. Mm-hmm. I was just, my wife and I, we went to Lloyd Harbor this weekend, and we were looking around at the Lloyd Manor, and I was just amazed of the depth and breadth of what this guy achieved on Long Island. And I think about all the leaders back then and all these industrialists and whatnot and what they achieved on the island and other areas. And the reason why they achieved it is because there was no income tax. There was just a consumer's tax. There was no income tax. And because there was no income tax, these guys were free to take their money and invest. invest in whatever. And they employed hundreds of thousands of people and really built the backbone of this country. And ever since basically the income tax, and specifically, 1913, it's gotten worse to where that, believe it or not, it was at 90% for some tax states at one point in time. JFK actually reduced the tax rates by 70%, and that's why you saw such an economy boom. And because people don't realize rich people, when they have money, they consume. They make investments, they buy factories, they do things and whatever. Those hire people, employ people. It's cascading. The other thing I used to, everybody was going out and they were getting sea salt. Most of the salt that is mined, believe it or not, by Morton Salt and these other places actually come from ancient seabeds. Mm-hmm. People were taking and getting it on. Again, I have sea salt too. And I'm not going to consume it any further because it all contains microparticles of plastic.
Well, what doesn't contain microparticles of plastic?
Now?
Yeah.
Nothing.
I mean, everything that we're doing is plastic. It's all made out of plastic. Computers.
We're breathing plastic.
We're breathing it.
Right. There's indoor pollution from synthetic fibers that are
in the chairs that we sit in,
couch,
in your clothing.
You name it, clothing, exactly. It sheds microfibers of this plastic. It's taken into your lungs. And unfortunately, the plastic molecules, they absorb toxins. It's a problem. I mean, sea salt around the world is contaminated by plastic. Water around the world is contaminated by plastic. Actual water that you drink.
Not even just the Fukushima
regular
problem.
Water.
We're talking about just not radiation. We're talking about just plastic in general.
And believe it or not, I would always say this, there's 5 billion people in the world that aren't using washing machines to wash their clothes. And those areas of the world, they have the least amount of plastic in the water.
Well, that makes sense, sure.
So there's a tie. A lot of people don't understand this, but do you know what the number one polluter in the world is?
I don't know. It's too many to guess.
When I was looking this up, I couldn't believe it. Agriculture.
In regards to what? You mean food you're talking about?
Growing food consumes the most energy and creates the most water pollution and toxic, to where there's literally dead zones around continents from all these nutrients getting back into the water, fertilizers and whatnot. The next polluter in the world, you're not going to believe it, is textiles.
No, that definitely could believe that, sure.
The largest polluter in the world is textiles. And they're also the largest, second largest now because of bottling company, but they used to be the largest consumer of resins, and now they're the second largest consumer of resins. These resins, by the way, they only cost 90 cents for 40 gallons.
Well, that's a big industry, though. People like to make a lot of things out of plastic. What can you do?
The problem is there's plastic trash and fishing nets and you name it, and those Coke containers they get strangling or fish and everything. They're on every single beach, on every single continent, on every single grain of sand. They're everywhere. And again, like I said, the plastics do break down with ultraviolet light, but they break into smaller and smaller particles that are taken up and eaten by the fish. Those fish are eaten by they die because it blocks the digest. They're eaten by other fish, to where that when you buy fish and you're cooking it, you're literally cooking plastic and eating it. Now that's not a very good thought, but that's actually what's happening. The studies.
And so what does that do? That causes more cancer, it causes more physical problems, you're saying, overall? That's why we have a lot?
Correct. It causes cancer. There are plastic fibers found in tap water around the world. And these fibers are small. They're up to 10 nanometers. So they're very small, but they're getting into your system, they're getting into your lungs, they're getting everywhere. They absorb the toxins from the environment. If you have a toxin, your liver should normally get rid of it, But these fibers gather a bunch up in your system, and they gather up toxins, and they partake these toxins to your cells, and they can cause cancer and other types of things. And
so, yeah, okay, I understand that, but I'm saying, since we use all these items every day, have they come up with a way to take the plastic that we don't use, and do they have like a bacteria that eats it or something? Or
believe it or not, there is bacteria that eat it that's inside the wax moth.
Oh, in the wax moth, okay, of course. I was just going to say that.
The larva of the wax moth actually consumes 40% its body weight an hour in plastic, and it has bacteria in its gut that actually break this stuff down.
Bring on the wax moth, I like that.
Because of the fact that it's bacteria, which means there could be a system processing plant designed in a ship that can ferment and gather up this plastic in the ocean and use this bacteria to essentially break it down. Mm-hmm. That can be done, but again, like anything else, it costs money. I think of other processes that if we had big tankers that are going in the ocean powered by lifters, which have a very hot process, they could do the same thing and process the water, make it clean, and get these plastics out of the water with a heat process. And by doing that, again, it costs money, and considering the scope of the pollution, though, you have to first go to the sources of the pollution.
Just like industry, what can you do?
Well, now plastics are industry-wide. So what you have to do is you have to come out with different resins, which they have. They're more expensive. They're 10 times more expensive than the resins we have today. These resins can be used by polymer or all these other plastic manufacturers that make those plastic pellets that these extruders use in industry across the board. There are some industries that you can't use bioplastics in. There's, for example, the manufacture of some cars and things like that. That's understandable. But believe it or not, that's only like 10 to 50% of the plastics that are actually produced. So there are some consumables that you can't use that resin for. For example, you wouldn't want your boat, you go out on the ocean in your boat, in a fiberglass boat, and you don't want that resin to be biodegradable in 5 years. That's because that would be bad.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to take a world consortium study of scientists to figure out what the best method is, but you don't want so many bureaucracies to where that nothing's being done. The problem is so acute that again, I would say that it's another Ellie event.
It's happening now. You have things the size of continents floating around plastic. What could you possibly do to fix that within a year or a decade? What could you do? You can only just stop right now and not make it as bad. What could you do? Again,
technology can solve this. I mean, the fact that these gyres are floating in the 7 seas, and they're in the large ones there's 4 large ones, and they're in specific areas of the ocean because of the circulation and currents. So that makes it easy to build specific ships, basically robotic ships that are going to go out, or they could be a limited crew, go out and actually capture and start processing this. Among 40%, believe it or not, of the stuff that's holding this all together in these dryers is fishing nets. Fishing nets are made from nylon.
That makes sense.
They're killing sea life and everything else. There needs to be certain rules applied to the standards of the industry. But I mean, with certain rules, people are going to just not do it. Like, for example, all whaling was supposed to be banned, but yet you still see Japan going out and killing 500 whales a year for quote-unquote science. I mean, but the reality, where those whales end up on the shelves at $300 an ounce as a delicacy, for Japanese people to consume. So the reality is that as long as there's profit in anything, people are going to do it. I put to the fact that 70,000 people in this country died last year from heroin overdoses and fentanyl, and yet it's banned. But the reason why you have such deaths is because it's supposed to be, I think it's 10,000 times from source to the end consumer, the profit rating.
Right.
And because of this, you have so many people that keep replacing to repeat putting it in. So as long as there's a huge profit motive, and there is in this, the plastic bags, I never liked plastic bags.
Why do they even have plastic bags?
I remember when they
you know,
started putting them in stores, and I couldn't stand them. They break, and they're
well,
really
now
thin.
you pay 5 cents for every plastic bag, so people are trying to bring their own
which is
bag.
just ridiculous. I always preferred a paper bag.
Yeah, why wouldn't they just keep paper bag? Well, it's killing too many trees,
I'm
right?
going to tell you why. I think that if you look back and you see what congressman there was and what lobby group, you'll see that that's how it was pushed through. That's how everything is pushed through. The problem with our governments worldwide is that these people should only be allowed 2 terms, period, and the lifetime donation of any one person or corporation should only be $10,000. And if you took the money out of it, and you took the fact that the founding fathers never wanted it as a career, you take that out of it, you'll have people who go into Congress and they actually will make decent decisions to better the planet. And, everybody was blaming the military. Oh, it's the military's fault. I did some studies, and believe it or not, the military of the United States is the cleanest when it comes to the ocean out of everybody. They separate their plastics from their metal trash. They specifically weight their stuff so that they put metal trash together so that it goes to the bottom of the ocean, and it can't have any toxins. I mean, they take the plastic and they put it through a special process and make these plastic wafers, and they bring it back to shore, and they deal with it. So, believe it or not, the biggest trash polluters are the cruising lines.
Well, that makes sense.
As far
sure.
as ships,
Yeah.
they deposit a tremendous amount of plastics into the ocean because, again, it's all about profit. So,
What do you mean? They just put them in bags of garbage and they just throw it out in the water? Is that what you're saying? They really do that?
They really do that.
Wow.
They really
That's
do that.
short-sighted. Why would you do that? Why?
They just throw the stuff overboard because
Really?
it's
Well, the
less
ocean's
weight,
pretty big. Who's going to
less
see?
weight and less fuel. The United States Navy doesn't care about the fuel because most of the big ships are nuclear powered.
Right.
All the way back to World War II, they found out that trash is a good way to spot a ship's position. So there's rules on that also for tactical reasons. They don't want this trash to be thrown overboard and float to the surface, and then other enemy ships can find out where you're going based upon the trash.
Right.
But I couldn't believe it. And I thought that the military was one of the big polluters, and it turns out they're actually one of the Navy's not only protecting the sea lanes across the world, but they're also trying their best to keep the ocean clean. They're having a lot of problems with it. The nuclear reactors, for example, I happened on my son's ship. They got clogged with zebra mussels, but also the zebra mussels.
What's that? What's a zebra mussel?
It's a specific type of mussel that used to be in Japan.
Like a clam
because
thing.
it got caught up in other intake, and then the village, they just dumped the water anywhere. The eggs were deposited in other places, so there's infiltration into San Diego, and not only. The reason why these mussels become a problem is because the plastic bags would attach to the mussels and then stop the circulation of water into the reactors.
That's a problem.
So that's a problem. So it's becoming a problem for the Navy because they need to constantly bring water into these reactors to keep them cool. Or just to run them. So they're finding out that these plastic nanoparticles, concentration is getting higher, and they're melting, and they're getting caught up in stuff, and it's creating a problem.
What can we do to change this? It sounds like we're doomed.
Well, like anything, I think that there is a solution to the problem as far as people have to know what the heck is going on. So the consumers, first of all, have to change and have to really demand and want products that are not in polystyrene, products that are in paper cups.
Well, they've taken action to do that on a lot of companies, but
Here,
we also
but
see
not-
things that are recycled, so we assume, well, that's good. They're recycled. They'll just keep making the same one over and over again. But you're saying that's a problem, recycled.
Only 5% of the plastic bottles that you consume are recycled.
Doesn't make any sense.
Well, again, it's because of the energy. Because
What's the point?
You have, just a certain amount of... When you take a bottle, for example, and you bring it to the food market and you get your deposit back on it, it immediately goes into that machine. It scans, it gets the barcode, gives you your money, and then it goes through essentially a shredding process. The problem is that the consumers of the plastics don't want that plastic. They don't want that plastic because some of it's green, some of it's, clear, some of it's... If it was all clear, it would be no problem. But because it's in different colors... And the reason why it's in different colors is because different food products have a problem with light, essentially. They're photosensitive, so they put specific dyes in to, handle the exposure to the sunlight. The thing is that you and I, we both grew up in the 60s, and, we had no problem going to the stores. If we wanted soda pop or whatever, we'd come in a bottle. I actually liked drinking it out of a bottle.
It tastes better. There's no question about it.
Well, it stayed colder longer.
It stayed colder longer. There's no question about it. It's better.
I personally think that as kids we just didn't drink as much of it because it was just harder to get bulkier and whatnot, and that's what it's all about, consumption, right? Mm-hmm. But today there's so many things that are made from plastic, toys, fabrics, everything.
Computers, everything.
Everything is
made
made
of
from plastic. You interact with it all the time. Definitely something has to be done to find something that would be more stable. I mean, a resin that would be either less biodegradable like glass is and not harm the environment, or that doesn't absorb chemicals or I don't know. I mean, the thing is always going to come down to cost. That's the problem. As long as plastic is cheap, and it's really cheap, manufactured, and it also allows people to build things that they normally... You have 3D printers today.
Exactly.
And that's starting to get a foothold in...
buildings with 3D printers.
Yeah, I mean...
What is that? That's going to be plastic and stuff, right?
Well, no, the buildings from 3D printers, it's a form of concrete and epoxy. So that's...
Well, epoxy, isn't that polluting? I mean, it's pollution.
No, it just means it's a compound where there's part A and part B, and when you combine them, they get hard. Mm-hmm. Concrete was actually invented by the Romans, and they discovered that if you fire rock and drive the water out of it and turn it into a powder, that if you recombine it later with water, it's a special combination of rock, but it gets hard, and the power of concrete is actually the water molecule is actually in there. I think it's always about cost, and I think that it's always about the consumer too. I mean, this world itself did ban CFCs.
That's true.
They realized it was an acute problem, and the studies came out. But I mean, as far as an acute problem, this is right up there. As a matter of fact, from 2015 to 2018 now, the oceans of the world have increased their tonnage of plastic by 150 billion tons.
It's an absurd number. I can't even imagine what that really means.
And it's just unbelievable. And now there is no beach that's not hit with trash every single day. For example, in California alone, they spend anywhere between $30 million a year with people just picking up garbage off their beaches. And now they're also picking up a tremendous amount of dead animals. Not only is that plastic gyre northeast of Hawaii, this huge continent, but it also contains a lot of Fukushima radiation from all the stuff that came from Fukushima.
Right.
So now you have a thing that's radioactive, that's polluting, that is causing problems, and then when there's a storm in the Pacific, it drives part of that trash
Of course.
onto the land on California. And like I said, most of the particles that are in the ocean now have been broken down to less than a tenth of an inch. And it's just like this soup of plastic particles that the sea life is eating it and dying and it's getting into our food chain and causing all kinds of problems. And
So is there a bright side to this story?
a bright side.
Are we all just going to be just robots eventually, and who cares about humans? Just get rid of them? Or do we need a reset, like an asteroid, to completely reset everything?
No, we don't need a reset. We need to become a Type 1 civilization. I keep getting back to the holy grail of tech. Everything comes down to energy. So we need a really cheap source of energy. Flybe Energy, which is in Huntsville, Alabama, they finished their plant. They're producing a prototype lifter thing. Hopefully, I'll see those put into worldwide distribution within 3 years. That's one thing that really changed the economic and release a tremendous amount of human potential. But I see that those units going in ships. I see them going in all kinds of things, and I see them.
No, that's a sort of fusion thing.
No, it's fission.
Fission, okay.
It's fission. It's a molten salt reactor, so it's very safe. It's extremely safe because it really can't leak. If it does leak, it goes into a drain tank, and it just turns into basically a solid crystal of salt. But moreover, it needs graphite to create the reaction to keep going. So it's very, very safe, and then because it operates at high temperatures, the turbines could be using CO2, and that means that you can have a very small turbine the size of a 4x6 table that generates what normally would take an entire building structure like in a regular nuclear reactor to generate the same power, because of the efficiency levels that you attain with liquid carbon dioxide is has a lot more pressure and more temperature gradient, so you get a lot more transmission of mechanical energy out of it.
So we just basically messed up this planet, and what can we do? I mean, really, is there going to be any solution? It seems like we're just going down, man.
Capitalism is the best way to do things as far as to get the most innovation and the best technology and the highest living standards. It's when governments get involved is a problem. So, like, for example, I think the biggest problem with all these things, it all comes back to energy and the tax on the energy. And if we didn't have all those taxes on the energy, and we were allowed to just, consumers are saying, hey, I want this $6 a month power bill instead of $300 a month. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that you'd want to pay $6 a month versus $300 a month. And
well, how do you do that, though? Everybody would have to say, look, we're not going to use your electric unless you make it lower. Everybody would say it. No exceptions. That's the only way you can get that done, right?
And the problem is, how do you survive? How do you live? You see, that's the thing, and they know this. They built it into the system so that you're basically you're almost living in a slave state because of the fact that you have to eat, you have to pay rent.
That's the next topic we're going to have to cover, because that's basically what it's come down to. We're in a slave state where you can't really forge ahead, and too much is not going to work. You can't do it.
Well, this problem is acute, where I would say that from Fukushima, we're going to become all sterile within 153 years.
And people aren't going to care right now. They're like, that's 153 years. They're not going to be alive. And they're not going to see the future. They don't care about the future.
Well, unfortunately, this plastic situation is going to hit a pinnacle by the year 2030.
Yeah, that's right around the corner, man.
And so I believe right now we're at a tipping point because it's in every single ocean. You have these plastic particles in every single. It's being consumed by you and me daily.
Yep, every
in the
second.
air we breathe, in the water we drink. Even if you filter it, your filters don't go down to the nanometer.
No, they don't. So are there companies like Plastic Solutions Investor Alliance? Are there companies out there, are there consumer things that are out there that are trying to make things better, or this has just got to start? We haven't started it yet?
Unfortunately, like Greenpeace, which I think was started with a Nobel cause. They wanted to change and shape the planet, but all these charities and these organizations used to clean up the planet and go to the beach and pick plastic up and whatnot. There's people that are being conned by these organizations because the leaders of these organizations, they just take 70% to 75% of the money and they go off and they have a nice time. They're just...
How is that legal to do, though? I mean, somebody's got to audit it, no?
You're not going to believe this, but if you looked into the books, for example, I hate to say this, but half your audience is going to go nuts now, but if you look into, like, for example, the Clinton Foundation, only 5% of the money that they raised, the billions and billions and billions of dollars for Haiti, 5% went to the actual Haitians. The rest of it, and it was perfectly illegal for them to do it. Matter of fact, they declared on their own taxes a deduction of almost 60% that went into their own charity, which they then used themselves, and they only put 5% back into the actual charity. If you're gonna write the legislation and tax laws and loopholes, and that's why the whole tax system needs to be essentially redone.
Yeah. It's so
it
corrupt.
Should be basically just a flat tax with no deductibles, period. And then you wouldn't have this. You wouldn't have the rich making all these rules and tax code of X amount of pages and whatnot. And also it's a burden upon the regular person who's working. I mean, the regular person who's working should only pay, in my opinion, 10 to 15% taxes, period, flat. Mm-hmm. No deductions on anything, and that's all they should pay on their income. I would even put it to 10%. And if the government can't get by on that, considering the fact that they tax our phones and they tax our energy and they tax all these hidden taxes that you pay.
Ridiculous. Every time I look at a bill, I'm like, it's mostly taxes that cause the bill.
Exactly.
What is these taxes? Who's getting this money?
Nobody and the way they break it up is it's just that it's not counted.
Yeah.
Because it's not counted, people don't see it. It's just like when you go to the pump and you buy gas.
Yeah.
And say the gas is $3 a gallon.
It's about that, yeah.
In all aspects of that fuel, 80% out of every gallon is taxes. And on the line of the cost of it, all along the line, it's almost like a VAT tax, because the Exxon oil drillers have to pay a certain amount of tax, lease on land and whatnot, and the refineries have to pay a certain tax, and all the way up and down the line. It's all kinds of tax. And the governments of the world are actually making 3 to 5 times more money than the producers of the actual oil. Mm-hmm. Because what do they have? They don't have to do anything. They just sit back and they get money in their coffers and whatnot, and it essentially perpetuates the same system, right? They get to stay in power, and they get to have all little toys and whatnot, and it's just like a big club, and we're seeing that all over the world. Really, it's really happening all over the world, and it has to stop because the people of the world matter. And that's what it comes down to. The people of the world, I really believe this, and I've said it a million times. I believe that there's nothing that if we all work together, there's no problem that can't be solved if we work together.
Absolutely.
I mean, we made problems, we can fix the problems. And again, if you become a type 1 civilization, if you get the holy grail of tech, if you get fission and infusion is a form of energy. If you get a photon computer, if you get superconductor, you can do so many things. And a lot of these chemical-based technologies would just fall by the wayside because it would first of all, it would get us off this rock, and we'd be able to colonize the solar system as well as start colonizing the next nearby stars and the galaxy, as it were.
Do you think we're going to get to that point? Do you see the future like that? Do you see us doing that? What do you think? What's your gut feeling?
I think that the world can change with the vision of one. And I saw that with...
No, you didn't answer my question. Do you really see that happening?
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
I
It's just going to take some time to do it.
No, it just takes a word in the darkness. And people that hear that word and they get a light of mind.
People have become aware of their surroundings and the dangers that we have here.
I couldn't believe what I was reading. And none of it was...
Where can we get some of this information? Where can people read some of this stuff?
I looked on the web, and it was very, very difficult. And you could definitely see that it was suppressed. It was suppressed. I had to go into cache files. There were articles that were cached. A lot of the stuff that I sent you was stuff that was killed. So there is a definite force that's out there that get paid every day to take down videos from YouTube, to take down articles that are in papers, to take down whatever. I mean, whether you could say it's the tourist industry because there were shots of Bali with all kinds of garbage on them and they didn't want it.
That's a problem.
Shots of Cancun and the Gulf with all kinds of garbage on it. Then I was looking at these home videos of people, and they were complaining, and this wasn't a little bit complaining. It's like 50% of the tourists of all these different... Here you spend $15,000 to go to Tahiti and Bali, and you go to a supposed brochure beach, and it's covered in garbage.
They don't show you that.
And they clean it up, and then 6 hours later, it's covered in garbage again.
Wow.
And and then there's a guy who was diving off of Bali, in these, and he's in a sea of garbage, of just this garbage. I mean, it's so disgusting. It's unbelievable, of all this plastic crap, and sinking, and the whole sea floor was littered with. It was just, these are things that are taken off. They're not shown. For all kinds of reasons. And I don't remember them 5 years ago. So I think just like any of these problems, it's exponential.
What about graphene? Isn't that supposed to be like one of the big things that they were coming up with? Isn't that supposed to be like an amazing polymer of some sort? I mean, I don't know if it's polluting, but I heard that was supposed to be like the next thing.
Well, it's not polluting. Graphene, basically, a lot of people were writing about it back in 2005.
Right.
And there's actually very, very inexpensive, cheap ways. They were saying, it's so expensive to make. Now you can make it with an old CD burner. Really cheap. And yes, there's all kinds of promises that are definitely being worked on, such everything from capacitors to instant charge batteries to different types of circuits that you can fold to ink that you can put on a printer, then print a circuit. Yeah. But, I look at it like, and you're going to hate this, it parallels certain technologies, like, for example, plastics were invented in the 30s. And I didn't really see the full realization till like the 50s, where they started really coming up with different types of machines, injected molding machines specifically. So I see that in the past 10 years, there have been strides in major universities with graphite. I think that's going to be one of the things that lead us to a room conducting superconductor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's definitely going to be a new version of tech where it's incredibly strong and it has tremendous uses. Can it be used instead of plastic? Essentially, graphene is as close as you can get to a two-dimensional object.
Uh-huh.
It's only one atom thick.
I know. It's incredible.
It's as many atoms long as you want, but it's only one atom thick, which is extremely interesting. But that's another show.
It is. I mean, where's our space elevator? You've been talking about this for 30 years. Where is it? I don't see it.
Well, they didn't have the materials to be able to make it until graphene really came to existence. Mm-hmm. But, I think that if they were pushing it 30 years ago really, really hard, we really had a space program, we would have had the graphene, I think, earlier. We would have had a photon computer earlier. You can't go to Mars with plastic.
Right.
You need to have solutions, and you need to have technologies. That's I get back to JFK, but he what he said was absolutely right. I mean, he knew that the spin-offs of going to the moon would be greater than the actual feat itself, and in every fuel cells to composites to every single technology today is really from that 9-year renaissance.
Right, and then that's a whole other story.
That's a whole other story.
We haven't been to the moon in 50 years. It's kind of suspicious. I'm like, I don't believe it. I think there's programs out there that have done, who knows? That's a whole other story. Well, that's another exciting edition of...
That's another show.
Of doing a show here with Bob. I wanted to let you know, if we were listening to Clam Radio, I'm talking to Bob Ball. And Bob was talking about the dangers and the dangerous aspects of the plastics that we have here on planet Earth and how it's impacting our lives as we speak. And there are definitely things that we can do about it. We could change things. Again, it's all up to everybody getting together and saying, look, we want to change it.
Right. And the other thing was with the advent of, again, energy, home insulation and making homes tighter and... Well, that had a really bad effect because it increased indoor pollution to where that some houses would be considered hazardous to one's health if you spend any time in them because of the formaldehyde and plastics, shedding themselves from polyester and nylon and one. Versus, an old house like mine it's a farm ranch, and in the wintertime feels like a breeze goes through it.
I know what you're saying, yeah.
Actually, because of its breathing like that, it actually has a better air quality than houses that are all tight and whatnot. Whole systems and what their effects have to be looked at to the nth. Like when they were making these plastics, they had to realize that it was going to cause a problem with the environment, and even in the 60s, they had to see that there was a problem, that the landfills. But you see, again, energy was the most cost, so it was cheaper for them to throw it out and make new, than it was for them to recycle it. And then we're getting back to space. If you're in the moon, for example, you can't throw anything out. You must recycle just about 100% of what you have, because if you don't, it's you're not going to be able to survive.
Absolutely.
So, and that's just the moon, So any systems that if we want to colonize Mars, we have to first test them on the moon.
Well, we learned that from going to the moon. All that stuff. We learned a lot by doing that. We learned how.
Well, we learned, the reality is there's a lot of things that we learned from the moon. And I go back to that time photograph, which was done from Apollo 8, where they took a picture of this black space in this little blue ball.
Right.
And everybody, there was a shot that was done of Voyager as it was leaving the heliosphere of the sun, which means it was leaving our known solar system and going into interstellar space. And they programmed it to take a picture of the Earth, and it was a little pinprick blue dot.
Right. That's it. That's all we are.
And everybody from Napoleon to Genghis Khan to Christ to George Washington, everybody you've known. And, you have to think about this. Here's the astronauts that left this Earth. They went to another, essentially, planetoid. And they're looking back at that planetoid, and they're realizing that everything they've known, everything they've done, everything they've seen, every human being, everything, they could cover it up with a thumb.
Yeah.
And that must have been just, I don't know what... I don't know what you could say after seeing that. It would be I thought it made a very profound change for the environmentalists on this planet, because there was a tremendous amount of pollution that was done in the 40s and 50s, where insecticides, DDTs, and other types of things were being. The Hudson River was so polluted.
Right.
It was
well, they
ridiculous.
changed a lot of that. They got rid of DDT.
It was
and
ridiculous.
stuff.
Yes, and so there is, things can change. And now, we as a country ourselves, we actually have some of the cleanest environment in the world, but unfortunately, the third world, and you could say China. Coming out of the third one, and as these countries come out of it, they are just polluting ridiculous. And now they know better, but there's such they don't care. They really don't. They're so short-sighted with this money that it's just easier for them to throw it away, dispose of whatever. They don't care.
Yeah, move on.
And,
they don't care.
And garbage heaps and whatnot in Mexico. And, most 90% of the trash from the Rio Grande comes up to us, with the flow of the river. And it's all from Mexico. And it would never pass, Now, like I said, we now have bald eagles flying here on Long Island. We now have red foxes. I have deer regularly coming to my backyard.
I've seen a few in
James.
this area. Sure, it's weird.
So our actual environment is actually getting better in some respects, and other these microplastics that obviously has to be dealt with. I think it's because people don't know about it, but I think that. Once the word gets out, they'll make us think about it. But these other countries are just dumping into the ocean. 50% of the ocean pollution is coming from only 5 countries, and none of it is from us. Mm-hmm. It's coming from these other countries, and but it's affecting us. Every single day, there's. What is it? 2 million tons that are being deposited on beaches worldwide every single day.
Every day.
That's and the thing is that people are throwing this stuff away, or that it's being carried into the oceans from storms or whatnot, or runoff, and they have to be made aware. That's number one. This is how you solve the problem. Okay, you identify the problem. You then discuss it, and the discussion has to be brief because it's an acute thing. And then solutions have to be proposed, costs have to be figured out, and then they have to be executed. That's how you solve a problem.
Right.
So thank you very much, John, for inviting me down.
My pleasure.
And God bless everyone. Oh, thanks for everybody who's serving. I really appreciate it. As an American, and I appreciate people who sacrifice themselves to their life and time to save others.
All right. Thanks.